Hello and welcome to another edition of The Front Page. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my privilege to be here with two good friends and two guests I'm sure most of you already know. On my far right is Jeff Wilson, who is the representative from Manchester in the state legislature. Jeff was first elected in 2008. He's going to be serving this year on the House Ways and Means Committee. And next to him is Patti Komline, a state representative from Dorset. Let me see if I can get this right here. Dorset, Landgrove, Peru, Danby, and Mount Tabor.
Very good.
Nailed it. All right.
Excellent.
And Patti has been, is going to be the assistant minority leader of the Republican Party this year in the House and also a member of the Judiciary Committee. She was first elected in 2004. Jeff, Patti, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank
Great
you
to be here.
Let's start with you, Patti. Just to kind of get us started, what do you see, and Jeff, I'll ask you this question as well, what do you see as sort of the big deal issues that the legislature will be dealing with this year in the coming session that is going to be getting underway this week?
I think our biggest challenge is the budget, and you'll hear a lot of that. And we had heard, I guess about a month ago, the budget shortfall was $112 million. Now it's up to $150 million. Challenges for Change, which we passed last year, which passed a budget anticipating savings, is coming up about $6 or $8 million short. It was also projected that that would save $36 million this upcoming year. So I think you're going to see that budget shortfall, find out it's much greater than it is. So that is definitely the most immediate pressing challenge.
So finances, taxes, spending.
Yeah, and we're not sure we're going to see any more federal money coming in. So.
And Jeff, what's your take on how things are going to shape out?
Well, I'd agree with Patti. That's a daunting challenge, the budget deficit that we're looking at and how to put all the pieces together to close that gap, especially without the ERA money, the federal ERA money this year. We're also going to be, there's a special commission on taxation that will be issuing the report next week, looking at revamping a number of broad-based taxes possibly in the state of Vermont, and the idea is to compress the rates and broaden the base. We'll see what happens in that regard. I imagine my committee, Ways and Means, will be taking a good hard look at that. There'll also be coming up in the next couple of weeks a report from the consultant the legislature has hired in reference to health care reform, and in the report, and his recommendations will be forthcoming. And the overarching, I guess, goal and objective that the governor has put forward is economic development and putting folks to work and creating better jobs. And that's an enormous challenge, I think, in this economy and in any state, and including Vermont. But he seems very dedicated to that objective, and we'll see what his plans entail.
Well, the governor outlined a fairly ambitious agenda, it sounded to me when I read his speech over. Hoping to do some enhancements in broadband to extend that every last mile around the state by 2013, I believe. A single-payer health plan, as you alluded to. Sort of reinvigorating agriculture in the state. A few other points. And yet somehow or another this was going to happen without raising any broad-based taxes. Is that realistic, do you think, or are we going to be struggling here to kind of square that circle?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what his budget message holds, and
that's coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and how he fits all these pieces together. I think a lot of people are actually wondering that. There are a number of initiatives that he's outlined, but on the other hand, he explicitly stated that he is not in favor of raising broad-based taxes. We do have the $150 million budget gap. We do have a number of needs that must be addressed in the Medicaid arena, human services, and education. Those are the big pieces of pie in the budget pie.
Right.
So yeah, I think that it'll be intriguing to try to get a better idea as to what he views as the answers to some of these daunting questions, and he's already initiated a hiring freeze, which he suggests will save $12 million. But I think he's got some good people around him. He's retained the Commissioner of Administration and Finance from the Douglas administration, Jim Reardon, who's very knowledgeable, a lot of years and experience under his belt, and also hired which I think is a very capable individual, former treasurer of the state, Jeb Spalding, as the Secretary of Administration. And Jeb is very respected by, I think, both sides of the aisle. a centrist who did a really capable job as the treasurer and former Senate Appropriations Chair. So yeah, I have some faith in those folks. So we'll see. I'm going to withhold judgment until I see a little more as far as what they come out with.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, when we look at, let's take education, our education budget. And last year we passed a bill that had people suggest to the schools, voluntarily cutting their budgets based on a recommendation from the commissioner, and we were supposed to save $23 million there. I often thought about what your conversations were like around the dinner table at Jeff's house, considering his wife. I think it was about 4% she was supposed to cut,
yeah.
right? And it was a bill you supported?
It was, yeah, it was indeed, yeah.
But, as a voluntary, position, we only saw $4 million out of the $23 million that we were supposed to see savings in, and then the federal government gave us the additional $19 million to correct that. So where we come up this year, because I don't think we're going to get federal money, so already we have a challenge with our education budget, and then Governor Shumlin. Got to get used to saying that. Governor Shumlin wants to add pre-K to that. He wants to. I don't understand how you're going to do that when we can't even meet the needs for K through 12 right now, or struggle to meet those needs. And then with regard to, we're totally supportive of him and agree that there's no more taxing capacity for Vermonters. So I don't, and there are other things he wants to start up initiatives, and I'm not sure if it's going to be the legislature, I guess, that goes and says with regard to budgeting and programming, no, Virginia, there is no Santa Claus, and we have to be the grown-ups to pass a budget. So it will be interesting to see how he plans on doing all of this.
One footnote on that,
sure.
just to add as far as the dinner table conversation and the challenge that Manchester had and BRSU in meeting their spending targets. BRSU they're one of the few supervisory unions that did indeed meet that target. So I got to give them a plug here.
That's great, but next time around, what schools will, when they realize I feel like dupes, but they will be getting money back.
Well, what's the likely outcome going to be then of this? The target was $23 million. I mean, we talked about this before. Wound up coming up with $4 million in savings, but there's a $19 million pot of money.
Had that balances out too. As of 2023.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's a coincidence. But anyway, where does that leave us then? That means the money has to come from somewhere, right? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, what about the other aspects to challenges for change? We heard an awful lot about the education portion of that, but that's a much more far-reaching agenda that they're trying to implement savings throughout government, other branches other than education. And I guess I haven't heard a whole lot about where that stands. Is that also struggling to kind of meet targets, or has there been more success in the other non-educational aspects of challenges for change?
It's struggling, and this year I was talking to somebody in finance, and they said this year, you said it was $38 million we're supposed to, and I think we're going to be between $6 and $8 million shy of that this year. But the big thing is, for the next budget coming up, we're supposed to find another $36 million. They said there's no way that's happening. They can't. And a lot of it, is corrections. And we're going to work this year. We're going to pass a lot of bills, or a lot of bills will be passed in the House, and we're going to support them, that are expanding on sentences. And we do that all the time. We extend sentences for people in corrections, and then we say, well, now you've got to cut your budget. I mean, we really shouldn't be passing any bills that create new crimes or put people in prison for longer, because we're looking to cut that budget. And it's tough, and it's a fast-growing budget, corrections, right? So that's one of the big areas for challenges for change that they're finding more challenging.
Being a challenge, right? Jeff, do you think that that whole program? I mean, in theory, it sounds great, to work smarter and be more efficient and save money in the process. But so far, have you seen evidence that, again, just to kind of look at the non-education portion of that are we making headway there, or is it too early to tell?
Well, I think you're exactly right. In theory, it sounds great, and the whole idea is Gore proposed, Vice President Gore, way back when, reinventing government. But I think they're finding in many areas that the devil's in the details, and it's a little more difficult than anticipated. So I think at this point, the reviews are mixed. They're having trouble, as Patti indicated, attaining the FY 11 savings as hoped for, and I'm not sure. They'll probably have to do something budget adjustment to close that gap of those challenges that were not attained. As far as on the education side of the equation, the $19 million federal money is one-time money. It'll help a great deal in FY11, the current fiscal year. but what are we going to do come FY12? I mean, there'd be an enormous gap at that point in time that without any reduction in spending by school districts will be very difficult to, I think, address. And also the additional $36 million in general fund savings and challenges for FY12. We've already, I think, picked all the low-hanging fruit when it's come to spending and savings in much of the state budget. So to try to squeeze out another $36 million is really going to be difficult, I think.
So does that suggest that some of the ideas about consolidating school districts and supervisor unions, are there savings to be achieved if that were really pursued vigorously? Or is that really a chimera where, it sounds like there should be some money that we could save by, dropping the number of supervisor unions from 62 to 16 or something like that. But really, when you get right down to it, there really aren't that kind of big dollars there to be had.
Well, I think it depends on the various region and what school districts are involved. I think there are indeed, and I'm an advocate of regionalization and the regional education district concept. I know we've had this history of local control, but the reality is we have a shrinking student population, and we need to maximize efficiency and optimize the number of students in a classroom so they're not too few and not too many. And I think there are a number of districts where you can do that by consolidating. And I know Dan French, BRSU, has done some analysis relative to Manchester, Dorset, Manchester, Sunderland, and others. And he's finding, tens of thousands of dollars in savings. But there's got to be some change in governance, I think, too. If we're going to consolidate districts, there's got to be some governance changes where that superintendent can't be expected to go to a meeting in each town every night. Right. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing for many Vermonters to wrap their minds around.
We're used to being close to the centers of power.
Right.
Right.
So I think there's got to be some changes, and that's going to be necessitated by just the dollars aren't there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be tough for the state to invest general fund dollars like they have in the past. And if we don't invest those general fund dollars to try to assist educational budgets statewide, then property taxes will go out of sight. And so there's this fiscal pressure that's going to invoke some change, I believe.
So you think this year?
I think there'll be some of that will happen ground up, I think, bottom up, just because of the lack of the capacity to just have those monies available. And people are just going to draw the line at property tax increases at some point in time, I believe.
One other thing that kind of bubbled up a little bit, I think, last year during the governor campaign was this question of unfunded pension liabilities. And we've started to see a few areas around the rest of the country kind of being caught on that. The state of Illinois is one example, California, a couple of municipalities here and there that are basically finding themselves unable to meet pension liabilities that they accumulated over a long period of time, thinking that, well, when the time came to pay those off, the money would be there, but lo and behold, didn't happen. My understanding is that there's a fairly large shortfall in the teacher pension fund, and there's also another one in the state workers pension fund. But I'm not sure exactly how many dollars that translates into. But do you see that as anything that we here in Vermont need to be worried about, or is that a ticking time bomb that's going to go off in the near future?
I think we should be very concerned. I know Governor Douglas had proposed taking the $19 million that we got from the feds that we put for the schools towards that. And I know it's something that Jeb Spalding is very concerned about. So if we're not putting the $19 million towards the pension plan, but hopefully Jeb will be attentive to that in the coming years.
But it's nothing that's really reaching a crisis stage now, I assume, like it is in Illinois, for instance.
It's something we need to keep an eye on. It's a very, very important issue, both on the teacher side as well as the state employees side, but it pales in comparison to the unfunded liability problems that we see in some of other states such as New York, New Jersey, Illinois. And one of the primary reasons for that is that our retirement program is not nearly as expensive, and the pension system is not nearly as plush, I guess, or luxurious as many of these other
Right.
states offer. It's more modest in many
Right.
regards.
More Vermont.
More Vermont, definitely. And last year, the legislature, and this is something Jeb Spalding actually spearheaded last year as treasurer, pulled together a compromise that did address a substantive portion of the teachers' liability, pension liability problem, whereby teachers now have to pay in at a higher rate, and they will retire at in an older age. That saved $28 million the first year. So that's a great first step in addressing the pension liability problem on the teacher side. My understanding is the administration is trying to do and will do through negotiations will take the same approach with state workers whose liability problem is not as pronounced or was not as pronounced as the teachers, but still something we need to certainly address in the near future.
Let me ask a political question, if I may. And Patty, I think I'll direct this to you first.
That's good.
The Republicans in the State House number, 48 in the House of Representatives, and I think 7 in the State Senate.
8 even, I think we picked up
8 now. Anyway, distinct minorities. I think Democrats have a supermajority in both houses. We have a Democratic governor. I mean, what do you think is the role of the Republican Party in the State House, and how do you see yourselves as being able to be an effective check, I guess, if that's the right word, on that? I mean, it must be tempting to kind of take a page out of the playbook of the National Republican Party, which in 2009 was confronted with a similar situation, and at least it seems to me kind of took this, well, we're just going to say no to everything, and kind of be a thorn in the side, and lo and behold, 2 years later was rewarded with some substantial electoral gains. Now, do you see that as a strategy that would make sense for
Those are
you
discussions
folks?
that are going on right now, and there are the people in our caucus that believe we should say no to everything, and then people that just don't want to be the party of no. And but we're the party of no because the agenda is not ours, and so the things that are coming onto the floor aren't things we'd be bringing onto the floor. So it's not, we don't just say no, we have an alternative. We offer alternatives. And so I'm not sure really how that's going to play out this year, because most of us, with the turnaround that we have in the legislature, most of us have not been here with the supermajority. That was under Walt Freed. So I'm not really sure. One thing that I think we lose out on is, it was Bill Botso from Pownell who said, it's the majority's job to steer the ship, it's the minority's job to point out the rocks. You've probably heard me say that before. It's really good. And we had a lot of help with the administration, with commissioners coming to us when certain bills are being proposed, and being able to give us the facts that we don't have the in-depth knowledge or the access to, crunching numbers. For instance, when they propose a state tax or capital gains tax, they were able to give us numbers and things to use to argue, to point out the rocks.
Right.
We don't have those people anymore because Governor Shumlin has his own people in there. So we're not going to have a heads up from commissioners and people in the administration saying,
And
hey,
they're probably not going to share that information with you
no,
in a
no, they will not
timely
be
manner.
sharing that information with us, and we won't have a clue what's going on with that budget, frankly.
Right.
We're just not. And so I think the state is actually going to be at a loss for that, because we're going to have to struggle in our own ways, and we're going to put together an advisory cabinet outside of the building to help us as best we can, but that will be very difficult. So it's going to be challenging times for us, no doubt.
And Jeff, do you see the way clear for your party, the Democrats, to basically push forward with a couple of projects that may have been kind of stymied by either Governor Douglas or any other factor that might have come along, or is it going to be the case where it's still going to be hard for for the Speaker Shap Smith to craft a majority where everyone, let's see, you need 76 votes to pass something, is on the same page, or how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think the biggest advantage of having a Democratic governor with a Democratic House and Senate is the ability maybe to chart a longer-term course, be a little more visionary, as opposed to fighting day-to-day battles. So that is my hope, that we're able to develop a longer plan looking forward for Vermont and for Vermonters. But I think, and we saw in the Dean administration, any party, whether it's Republicans or Democrats or progressives, they don't all just move forward in lockstep. There are different viewpoints in each party. The Dean administration, when there was a Democratic legislature and a Democratic government, there are often disagreements relative to how we should move forward and what policy should be embraced and decisions made. So I think we'll see the same thing, a lot of give and take. The reality is, though, Democrats have to act responsibly. If Democrats don't act responsibly in development of policy and making decisions, then by all means, kick them out, kick us out, and have the Republicans try or the progressives try. It's got to be a conscientious and responsible approach to governance. If not, the other party should be given a chance. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I'm not going to tell the Republicans what to do, but I think they will play an important role, even though the numbers are down, in fact checking, basically. And as Patti said, the great line by Bill Botso is pointing out those rocks, and that will be important. And I'm sure they will do that.
Problem is, the smaller our voice, we're yelling rocks, but they're not necessarily hearing us. I find as our numbers go down, it's harder to get them to pay attention. So this time I expect it'll be even harder.
I'll listen to you, Patti.
Yeah, well, okay, we'll talk.
Well, that's good. I was wondering, are there any what we might call the sort of small bore issues, quote unquote, that are bubbling up? I'm thinking, I'm not sure if other people would consider this a small bore issue, but like the texting bill from a year or so ago. Anything like that? We've heard an awful lot about budgets, taxes, one thing or another that would be great to do. We haven't even talked about energy or Vermont Yankee, which I'm sure is going to be a huge subject that you guys will be dealing with perhaps a little bit later in the session.
I think physician-assisted suicide or death with dignity, depending on which side of that issue, that's going to come up. That's going to be huge. You weren't here for that last time, were you?
No.
When we took that up.
No.
It is as passionate and divisive an issue as same-sex marriage was, which anyone who tells you that issue wasn't a distraction is not being honest about. That was a huge distraction in a tough budget fiscal time. That's a bill that I supported in the past, but this time around I think this is not the time to take that up. After we come out of this recession perhaps, but this will be something that we get. You get a lot of people mobilized, and the State House becomes very focused on. And that's something that I've heard rumors is coming up soon. I don't know if you have too.
I have not.
But that's going to be big and taking up a lot of time.
Any particular bills that either of you intend to introduce that might have a real local flavor or an impact here or anything like that?
Actually, one I didn't say earlier when we were talking, but now with you on Ways and Means, you might be interested in. Roger Squire from Dorset, you know him? He's got an in.
Oh, yes, I do know him, yeah.
He had talked to me about a bill that caps property taxes at 10% of your gross income or net income. I don't remember what it is at this time. And people in the State House couldn't believe it. There are people that actually pay more than 10% of their income on their property tax, and there are, most definitely. So that might be something interesting, and people in this area would be interested in because it does affect people, and that's a way to help temper the property tax issue is going that way.
One question I thought I should ask, the streamlined sales tax question, we just heard a little discussion about that earlier today. Do you think that really has impacted Manchester and Dorset in this area in a negative way? I mean, I know when it went through 3 or 4 years ago, the idea was it would be kind of at least a revenue neutral thing. But I guess it hasn't worked out that way. Is that anything that you think we might hear anything about this year?
Well, Manchester was not overly enthusiastic with it because clothing was indeed taxed at the 1%, even though the state did moved from 6% down to 0% on clothing. But under the streamlined sales tax, you couldn't have this bifurcated system whereby you had 0% on clothing on the state level and 1% on the local level. So clothing is not taxed at the local level now. There's a lot of clothing stores in Manchester, so Manchester took a fairly significant hit from a revenue perspective based on streamlined sales tax initiative, and that what effectively was a consequence of eliminating that 1% on clothing. So they have not been supportive of it, and the benefit that they keep saying will come at some point in time is the ability for states to tax internet sales and that revenue stream that's out there that's growing. But we haven't seen that yet, and I'm not sure when it will come, and it's something on Ways and Means that we will be discussing, I think, in great detail this year.
Okay. Well, I think we're about out of time, but I want to thank both of you for taking the time today to
thank
be
you
with
for
us,
having
share
us.
some of your thoughts and ideas about the coming session. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting time up there. I think it always is. And good luck to both of you, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again.
Well, thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
having us. It was great. Appreciate
All
it.
right. And thank all of you for watching. This has been the Front Page on GNAT. My name is Andrew McKeever, Managing Editor of the Manchester Journal. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you the next time.